Father, we thank you for allowing us to be here today. I pray that you will clear our minds of anything that might distract us from this time with you and with one another, because it really is a privilege to be able to gather right here, right now, and we don't want to take that for granted, God. We want to make the best use of this time because we never know what tomorrow will bring. And so during our time gathered here, let us draw near to you, and let us set aside any obstacle that would keep us from drawing near to you, God, and help us understand your word according to your understanding, not according to our own limited and faulty human understanding, God. But may your Spirit be present with us, guiding us into knowledge and wisdom, so that by the end of this study we would be better equipped in our understanding of you and in our ability to live out your truth as we go out into the world. We love you, God, and we praise you for who you are. In your name we pray. Amen. There will be a second Bible study after this Bible study today. The second Bible study will be a lot shorter. It will not be another 2-hour-long Bible study. It'll probably be 15 to 20 minutes. And it's going to be very similar to what we've done in the past, where whenever we were going through 1 Samuel, there would be some chapters where I was like, hey, there is a Psalm of David that really ties in to the story we're going through. And there happens to be like 3 Psalms of David that tie into what we're going through here. But if you go to 1 Chronicles, it actually has one long song that kind of combines those 3 Psalms together. And it is the psalm that David sings right after he brings the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. And I like to kind of look at those together because it's kind of like we get insight into David's head. It's kind of like reading a person's journal entry or a diary or something where you're like, oh, this is what's going on in the head of the man after God's own heart as he's doing these things. And so after this Bible study, we'll probably take like a little 5-10 minute break, and then we will do that one, but it'll be a lot briefer. And then y'all are welcome to hang out for a little bit and chat and talk and stuff. But I just want to let y'all know in case you are interested in doing that. That being said, 2 Samuel 6 is probably one of my favorite chapters. No, not probably. It is one of my favorite chapters in 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 7 next week is probably the most significant chapter in Samuel altogether, and it's one of the most important chapters in the entire Bible. So that's going to be one you want to be here for. But this week is one of my personal favorites just because we get to see David doing some really cool stuff. But very briefly, let's summarize a little bit of the context that gets us to this point. And I am not talking like super in depth. Like, let's just summarize who is David, what's his deal, get us from the shepherd to the throne. Somebody.
David's a shepherd, and there's this guy who's the king before him called Saul, and God's like, hey, you're not doing what I'm telling you to, and so you're not going to be the king anymore. There's going to be someone else who's a man after God's own heart, and that's David. He made it to the shepherd's field, and he's rising through the ranks. He's gaining more popularity. Saul doesn't like it, so he goes on this big rampage and tries to kill him. Saul ends up dying. Then we have David. He becomes the king of Judah, and then he became the king of Israel, which is like the fulfillment of what God told him he was going to be.
Perfect. Yeah, that was even briefer than I could ever actually accomplish.
Point is he wouldn't touch Saul.
Yes, yeah. So we got to see this long trajectory, really epic story. I think the story of David in the Bible covers like 62 chapters of the Bible or something like that, which is really remarkable if you think about the fact like Abraham, I mean, his story is like 12 or 13 chapters. Moses, I mean, he's got a bunch of books, but if you actually look at what books are like just focused on his life story, I mean, you look at Moses' birth, and like in one chapter, like 40 years pass. Like it's wild. It's a very like David, we just get so much about him. But we see him from the moment he's a little teenager, a little teeny bopper shepherd who's anointed as the king, and then he rises through the ranks of Saul's army. He becomes this amazing warrior. He becomes a fugitive, and like you said, he will not touch Saul's head because Saul is the anointed one of Israel. But eventually Saul is killed. David is delivered from being a fugitive. And what we've been seeing in the first 5 chapters of 2 Samuel is David's ascension to the throne. Right? And so in chapter 1, he learns about Saul's death. He mourns over Saul. In chapter 2, he becomes king of Judah. But keep in mind that Judah is just the southern half of Israel. And really, it's just one particular tribe. But that tribe covers a lot of territory. And it's his tribe. And so he becomes king of Judah for 7 years. And then chapters 2, 3, and 4 kind of span those 7 years. And we see him anointed king. And then we see the death of Abner, the death of Ishbosheth, who are just two significant figures that we've talked about in depth in previous weeks. And really just brutal civil war going on between the houses of David and Saul. It's like the biblical version of Game of Thrones. That's kind of what really 1st and 2nd Samuel is altogether, and going into Kings. And then last week, David finally is anointed king of all Israel. Right? With Abner and Ishbosheth out of the way, the house of Saul is done for, and the people of Israel come to David. They anoint him king, and we read that he is going to reign for another 33 and a half years, which ironically is about how long Jesus lived. I never really thought about that. That's kind of cool. So David, he reigns 7 years from Hebron in Judah, and then he reigns 33 years from Jerusalem in Israel. And so what else did we see happen at the end of chapter 5? There were two really key things that we saw happen. What's his first order of business after he becomes king?
He moves the capital to Jerusalem.
Yes, he moves the capital to Jerusalem. Up until this time, we think of Jerusalem, like when we think of Jerusalem, we think of Israel. But up until this point in Israelite history, Jerusalem was not an Israelite city. It had actually been Canaanite territory all this time. It was controlled by a group of Canaanites called the Jebusites, and the town was called Jebus. But then David goes in and he conquers it, and he calls this place Jerusalem. And the people call the place the city of David, which we will see in this chapter. And so he conquers Jerusalem, he makes that the capital, and last week we talked about all the political reasons he might have had for doing that, and also it's just a really nice city. As Benjamin can testify, because we've been there. And it was also in the tribe of Benjamin, wasn't it? So that's kind of cool. And then, after he made the capital Jerusalem, what else did he do at the end of chapter 5? Defeated the Philistines. Yes, he did what Saul could not do. By the end of Saul, like pretty much any time Saul is encountering the Philistines, he's not doing a very good job at fighting them. Right? There's one time when Saul's fighting the Philistines, and he takes credit for something that his son Jonathan did. Then there's another time whenever Saul shows up to fight the Philistines, and then this giant comes out, and Saul gets afraid, and he hides until a little shepherd boy named David comes out and kills the giant. And then, finally, by the end of Saul's reign, the Philistines have conquered so much territory that they have moved from the coastland all the way inwards to where they've almost reached like the Sea of Galilee area. And it's not looking good for Saul's kingdom. And so the Philistines have gained major ground during Saul's reign, but that's not how it's going to work for David. Because the Philistines... do you know what the word, like, Philistine means? It means something along the lines of invader, I believe. Because that was what they did. They were, like... if you're reading outside the Bible, you won't read the term Philistine. You'll typically read something something along the lines of sea peoples. Right? These are people who migrated across the sea, and they started out at the coast, and they just started conquering going inwards, right? So they were invading peoples who were trying to conquer the land. And so for David and the people of Israel, these are people who are trying to conquer God's promised land. And so that is a big no-no. And so the fact that Saul did not wipe them out shows that Saul was not equipped to be a king. David's first act of business after setting up Jerusalem as the capital is it's time to take care of the Philistines, right? So there's a clear message being sent. He is here to do things differently than Saul did. And if that wasn't clear enough, we arrive at 2 Samuel chapter 6.
Didn't one of the neighboring kings present him with a gift?
Yes, yeah. We had, what's his name? Hiram, king of Tyre. He sends David all this wood from Lebanon and all these different things in order for David to have a fancy house and palace, which is going to come into play later on when we reach chapter 7 next week. But yeah.
Maybe jumping ahead, but at that point, David's like, I've been gifted something nice for when I build something for God, and then God says you have too much blood on your hands.
Yes, and that's going to come next week. Yeah, so next week is whenever we're going to have this amazing moment. Like, literally, chapter 6 and 7 are really good moments for David. Chapter 6 is a bit of a mixed bag, but we'll see why. But yeah, so his capital's in Jerusalem, the Philistines are being wiped out, everything is going good, and now we've got to wonder, what is David going to do next? That's what all the tabloids of 10th century BC Israel are wondering, what will David do next? And we arrive at 2 Samuel chapter 6, which I have titled, The Ark Brought to Jerusalem. Now, before we even get to the chapter, what do you think? Like, just the title alone, what do you think David is doing by bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem?
I think he's honoring God.
He's honoring God. What message is he sending to the people?
He's saying, this is where my politics are, this is where God's going to be as well. God's going to be at the center of everything.
Yes. Yeah, like just the act of bringing the ark to Jerusalem, David is sending a message. This is one nation under God, right? Like, yes, my palace is established here, but the political capital is going to be the same as the religious capital. Saul never did this. In fact, we're going to talk about what Saul did with the Ark of the Covenant, notably his lack of doing anything with the Ark of the Covenant. Do you remember the last time we actually read about the Ark of the Covenant?
Wasn't it... Well, I wasn't here, but I'm going to guess Moses?
It wasn't with Moses. It was in Samuel.
So when the Philistines took it?
It was when the Philistines took it, and then eventually, some animals carried it back in, right? Saul never touched the Ark of the Covenant. David, his first thing is like, we need this thing in Jerusalem. And so David's reign is going to be different. But we have so much to cover today. Hopefully we can get through it all, just because I get so excited about it. But let's start reading. Sean, could you read this for us, verses 1 through 4?
Yeah.
Also, I hope y'all like this little picture of David here. It's kind of fun.
David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose. They went with all the people who were with him from Baal of Judah to bring up from there the Ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the Ark of God in a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the Ark of God, and Ahio went before the Ark.
There you go. Perfect. All right. So, simple enough story. What's going on here?
You're basically moving the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark.
Yeah, they're moving the Ark of the Covenant. David wants to move it to Jerusalem, right? He's got a good desire. The issue is that all because you have a good desire doesn't mean that you can just do things however you want. And there's going to be a lot of conflict that arises from this. And in just a moment, we're going to answer the question of why the Ark of the Covenant is in the place where it's at. Because do you know currently where the tabernacle is located? What city? Ooh, trivia. I know all the cities get mixed together.
Like, at this time?
At this time, where's the tabernacle at? It's not.
Shiloh?
Shiloh. Yes, the tabernacle is at Shiloh, but the Ark of the Covenant is not at Shiloh. The Ark of the Covenant is at Baal Judah, which I put a little note here. It's also known as Kiriath Jearim. I have a little typo there, actually.
And that was detailed in the chapter where the Ark got returned.
Yes.
But didn't it sit in the other town for a few years that they got moved to Kiriath Jearim?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're going to cover that in just a second, but because I do want to cover the context of that just to explain this stuff. But for right now, I want to just focus on what David's doing wrong here. But I do want to highlight that his heart is in the right place, right? This is the difficult thing that we see here, but it's also a good application point for us. All because you have a righteous desire doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it how God wants you to do it, right? And so let's walk through this and let's see what David is hoping to do, and then let's address like maybe how he's a little bit off.
One thing I can point out is he didn't inquire to God about this.
That's true. He didn't inquire God about this. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the main issue, though I do think that what he's doing here could have been avoided if he had inquired of God, like, hey, how should I do this? But okay, so David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. Think about how far David has come. Back whenever he was a fugitive running from Saul, 400 people came and found him in the cave. Now he's getting 30,000 guys together just to go do this one task. Just think about it. It's like a big army getting to go do this. He gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000, and David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the Ark of God. All right, so Baal Judah, that's the same as Kiriath Jearim. Put that on the back burner for now. We'll come back to it and explain why the heck the Ark is there. to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, Yahweh Shabbaoth, which means the God of heaven's armies. Right? Called by the name of Yahweh Shabbaoth, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. What's up with that description of the Ark of the Covenant?
What's a cherubim?
What is a cherubim?
Isn't it the two angel type things that are on each side of the Ark of the Covenant? They have little wings or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, so, they're these divine beings, divine creatures. I'm always hesitant to use the word angels, mainly just because I think we're sloppy with our terminology sometimes, and we have to realize that angel is just a job description. It means messenger, whereas cherubim is technically the type of being that it is, right? Whereas an angel can be a cherubim, but an angel can also be a human, right? It's a messenger. Whereas the cherubim is the actual type of creature that this is. And I wish that I had put a picture of the Ark of the Covenant here. But yeah, so the Ark of the Covenant is this gold box. And on top of the gold box, there were these two carved images of what we would associate with an angelic creature, right? So they're more animal-like or human-like creatures, depending on how they're depicted. And they would have large folded wings that are folded inwards, and the wings, if you can picture it in your head, they're leaning towards each other, where there's one cherubim over here, one cherubim over here, and their wings are curved inwards to where the points are almost touching, right? And they represent the presence of God. And you'll understand this better if you move on a few centuries after this, and you go to the time period of the prophets, right? And you go to the book of Isaiah or the book of Ezekiel, and they have visions of the heavenly throne room. And God is sitting on his throne, and underneath his throne, there are cherubim flying, and they're crying, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty." And they're saying all these amazing things. It's a super powerful image. And so, as we see in those visions that the prophets had, the cherubim represented the presence of God, right? The cherubim would gather, and that was where God dwelt. So what was the Ark of the Covenant to the people?
The presence of God.
It was the presence of God. It is where God dwelt. And so it says, to bring up the Ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. So his throne is there. Yes, they know that God is not confined to the earth, right? God is the God of all the universe. But when it comes to his presence on earth, he dwelt in the Ark of the Covenant, right? He was enthroned over the cherubim. So why would David want to bring this from there to Jerusalem?
I think it's because he wanted the presence of God in Jerusalem.
Yes. What is my favorite verse in the entire Bible? How presumptuous of me to assume everybody knows my favorite verse. I quote it all the time. What is it?
One thing thou shalt seek.
Yes, Psalm 27:4. One thing have I asked of the Lord, and that shall I seek, to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, and to meditate in his temple. It's a psalm of David. And he says, the only thing I want is to dwell in the presence of God. David has made his capital in Jerusalem. Where's David dwelling? Jerusalem. Okay, where does God dwell? He dwells in the Ark of the Covenant. And so, if David dwells in Jerusalem, and God dwells on the Ark of the Covenant, and David wants to dwell with God, where does the Ark of the Covenant need to be? In Jerusalem. Right? Make sense? We see this is David's heart. He says, I want to be as close to God as possible. Saul didn't care about where the Ark of the Covenant was at. He could care less about where God's at. Saul only cared about his own power. For David, God's the one who put him on the throne. David is a man after God's own heart. And he says, if God has put me on a throne here, then God needs to be on a throne here as well. Right? His kingdom is God's kingdom, and there's no separating that. That is why David is so amazing. And that's why I love that verse. Because how different would our lives be if that's how we lived our lives? Typically, we're so focused on asking the question, is this the right thing to do? Is this the wrong thing to do? And we just can debate about that endlessly. But what if the question we asked was, will this decision bring me closer to God or further from God? Because that's really what we should be worried about, right? And that's really what the difference between right and wrong is. But if we're focusing on how do I get closer to God, the decision might become a little bit easier to us, right? Because we have to figure out, okay, well, what does God want? It's not about what do I want, and you can't allow anything to get in our way of that, right? So that's why David wants the Ark of the Covenant here, right? That is where God is enthroned. And he says, I'm enthroned in Jerusalem. That's my capital, but this is God's kingdom, and so it needs to be his capital too. And so he's like, we need to bring the Ark of the Covenant there. And they carried the Ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Can somebody flip for me to 1 Samuel chapter 7?
Got it.
Okay, can you just read the very first verse of that?
And the men of Kiriath-Jearim came and took the ark of the Lord and brought it into the house of Abinadab on the hill, and consecrated Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord.
There you go. That's when this happened, right? 1 Samuel chapter 7. The issue is that Saul wasn't king yet. This is whenever Samuel was still in charge, right? And the Ark of the Covenant was put in Kiriath-Jearim, which is the same as Baal Judah, in the house of this dude named Abinadab, and it has been there ever since. Do you know how long ago that was?
Probably like 20 years.
Probably a good 60 to 70 years. Because we know that 20 years passed after this, while Samuel was still kind of ruling over them, which makes me wonder why Samuel didn't bring it back. I don't know about that. And then Saul presumably had about a 40-year reign. And so at least 60 years have passed, if not more than that, since this place has been there. And so this dude's probably pretty old. Abinadab is. Either that, yeah. So either that or maybe Abinadab is dead and still considered his house. I don't know. But 1 Samuel chapter 7 is when this ark was put here, and it has just been chilling in this random dude's house ever since then, which is kind of a funny idea, right? I mean, like, all this other stuff has been going on, and the Ark of God is just sitting in some random guy's house in some random city that we barely ever think of. And so they go down there, they take the Ark of God, they put it on a new cart, and they bring it out of the house. Do you see any issues with that at all?
I noticed you have something written about like a procedure.
He's observant. I see. Yes. The issue here is that, like, if we're just reading this, we might not notice there's an issue. But there is an issue, and you have to understand the law to see what the problem is. But for right now, let's just look at the rest of this. So they carry the ark, they put it on a new cart, they bring it out of the house of Abinadab, which is on the hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart. Right? Hey, Mom. So they take it out, and you've got Uzzah driving the cart, and Abinadab's going, and Ahio's going before the ark, right? So he's walking in front of it. Uzzah's the one actually guiding the cart. And we're going to stop there, and we're going to look at what the problem is. You go to Numbers chapter 4. In Numbers chapter 4, we have the different duties that are prescribed to one particular tribe of Israel, who are the priests. What tribe is that? The Levites. And the Levites themselves are separated into 3 different groups, and each of those 3 different groups are given different tasks in regards to how to move different things around, right? So some of them have to move the actual tabernacle itself, some people have to move the equipment inside the tabernacle, and then there's other ones who have to move the Ark of God. One of those groups is the Kohathites, right? There's all these ites and stuff in there. But the Kohathites are one of the 3 groups of the Levites, who are the priests, and this is the duty that's given to them. Numbers chapter 4, starting in verse 4. This is the service of the sons of Kohath in the tent of meeting, which is the tabernacle. The most holy things. When the camp is to set out, Aaron and his sons shall go in and take down the veil of the screen and cover the ark of the testimony with it. Okay, so just so you can picture this. The tabernacle was a big old tent, right? And it was separated into 2 sections whenever you walked into the tent, right? There was the holy place, which is the place where there would have been like a menorah, lampstand, there would have been showbread and all this different stuff in there. And then there would have been a veil, right? And the veil separated the holy place from the most holy place, the Holy of Holies. And the only thing inside the Holy of Holies, it was just like a square little room. The only thing in the Holy of Holies was the Ark of the Covenant. And that was where the presence of God dwelt, and the high priest was only allowed to enter in there 1 time a year. But whenever it came time for, whenever the pillar of fire or smoke would move around in the wilderness, they would have to move the tabernacle, right? And so God is giving them instructions for how they can do this in a safe manner. And so you go in there, and whenever you're going to move the ark, you go in and you take down the veil of the screen, right? So the veil separating the Holy of Holies from the holy place. They take down the veil. They cover the ark of the testimony with it. So it's covering the ark itself. Then they shall put on it a covering of goat skin, and spread on top of that a cloth all of blue, and shall put in its poles. So you've got 3 layers covering the Ark of the Covenant from the people. Why do you think that is? Why would you need that many layers covering the people from the Ark of the Covenant?
Because of the holiness of God.
Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. Yeah, He's holy. And you ever seen Indiana Jones?
Yeah.
Remember what happens when they find the Ark of the Covenant? Doesn't end so well for people, does it? Yeah, that's the one thing that I really like. It always surprises me that Indiana Jones doesn't just become a born-again Christian right then. I mean, you're just like, what? Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant. It's holy. This is where God dwells. And if you touch it, you die. So God's like, okay, you're going to put 1 layer, and a 2nd layer, and a 3rd layer, and then you're going to put these poles inside of it, and then the people are going to pick up the poles on their shoulders, and they're going to transport it, right? And when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, as the camp sets out, after that the sons of Kohath shall come to carry these, but they must not touch the holy things lest they die. So these are the Levites who must not touch the holy things lest they die. Now you compare this to what David's doing and you see that there's an issue, right? Because I don't read anywhere that these guys are Levites, and it doesn't seem like they're taking the necessary precautions. And you might see from David's perspective where he's thinking, well, hey, first, maybe David just didn't know the law full. Maybe he just hadn't had a chance to study it perfectly. But the issue is, all because you haven't studied it doesn't change God's rules, right? God still has the same standards. And so there's plenty of reasons why David might not have done this. Maybe it was because he hadn't studied it. Maybe he just thought, well, my heart's in the right place and God will make an exception. That's not how it works. Right? All because you have good intentions doesn't mean that God's going to change what he's doing for you. Right? God has a standard, and we have to recognize that he is Lord. And so David's heart is in the right place, but he's not doing things the right way. Keep that in mind. We'll return to this. But first, let's talk about how the heck the Ark of God ended up in this place. Originally, it started off way up here in Shiloh. That is where the tabernacle is currently at. And as far as we know, it kind of just stayed there. But you'll remember this story back in the beginning of 1 Samuel, whenever the people of Israel were going off to war, and they said, you know what's going to help us win this war? The Ark of the Covenant. And yes, the Ark of the Covenant did represent the presence of God, but they kind of started treating it like a magic totem, right? It was like this magic little device that if they brought it with them, it was a good luck charm. And if they just had it with them, they would win the war. And God obviously doesn't like when people do stuff like that, because they're kind of turning this golden box into a god of their own, and they're almost making the Ark of the Covenant into a pagan god. And so God actually lets them lose the battle, and the Ark of the Covenant is stolen by who?
Philistines.
The Philistines. Okay, they come back into the story, and the Philistines take it over to this place. Aphek is the place where the battle goes on, and the Philistines take it all the way down to the city of Ashdod. That is one of their cities. They had 5 main cities in that region, and this is one of them. And they take it to Ashdod, and they put it in their temple. And do you remember what happens?
Their idol breaks apart.
Yes!
Or falls over.
Their god, Dagon, their statue, it falls over.
And didn't this happen 3 times? Like the first time it happened, they went, repaired it, let it sit. Second time, same thing. The third time, they're like, all right,
Yeah,
we're done with this.
it kept happening, and they're like, ooh, this is problematic. And tumors started growing all over them, and they're like, oh, this is no good. So they took the Ark of the Covenant, they sent it somewhere else. And they sent it over to Gath, and then Gath sends it to Ekron, and it's staying multiple months in each of these locations. And then eventually the Philistines are like, this is no good for us. And so ironically, God didn't need an army to prove how awesome he was. And he even didn't need the Ark of the Covenant. God is afflicting these people on his own. And so the Philistines recognize, ooh, we do not want this Ark of the Covenant. We thought we were more powerful than Yahweh, but turns out he is more powerful than us. Let's send the Ark of the Covenant back. They load the ark onto this cart, and they get these oxes and these cows, and they're just like, hey, they smack them, and they say, just bring it back home. And the animals literally guide the ark back to this city called Beth Shemesh, right over there. The people of Beth Shemesh are like, they're just like out plowing their fields one day, and they look, and they're like, is that the Ark of the Covenant? Oh my gosh. Like, what are the odds? Like, we've been looking for that thing for like a year. And it just rolls in, being brought by animals, and they take the Ark of the Covenant, they bring it to this dude in Kiriath Jearim, and that's where it's been at this entire time. That's how it got there. And you notice what's really close to Kiriath Jearim? Jerusalem. And so now David's here. He's taken out the Philistines. He's got a little bit of downtime. And he's like, hey, whatever happened to that Ark of God thing? You think we could get that? And they're like, dude, it's like 3 miles away. He's like, well, let's go. And so that's how it got to this place, just so you have the context. Make sense? Okay, so now go back to the story. The people have the Ark of God on the cart. They are transporting it to Jerusalem, but they're not doing it the right way. Just your early predictions. What do you think is going to happen?
Somebody's going to die.
Somebody is indeed going to die.
Does somebody touch the ark?
Yep. Let's see. All right, Sean, read it.
And David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nason, Uzzah put his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, as God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah, and that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. And David was afraid of the Lord that day, and he said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? So David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David. But David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household.
All right.
Wow.
The story progresses. What do y'all think?
Ouch.
Wait, quick death?
Hopefully.
Yeah. Ouch and quick death.
Yeah, hopefully it wasn't as violent as in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It's not as bad as Beth Shemesh.
Yeah. What else y'all think?
Okay, this
Oh yeah, I forgot. Wait, sorry, the Beth Shemesh thing. I forgot people like looked inside of it and then like, how many people died?
Tens of thousands.
Yeah, that's, I forgot about that. I was trying to remember the story. That was brutal. Okay, sorry, what were you saying?
Okay, so this is like not like a super relevant question, but like what is a liar? Like
I am
this is
so
a liar
glad you
in
asked.
art.
This right here is a liar.
Okay.
Yes, that was just so. I'm so glad you asked. Right here.
Okay.
Yes, this is a lyre, also known as a kinnor. Yeah, this is the type of instrument that David most likely would have played.
Okay.
So it's a very relevant question, and people who are watching this online are probably going to think that I like asked you to ask that just so I could show off my new lyre. Fun fact: I actually bought this thing in the city of David, so in Jerusalem. So
Nice.
whoa, kind of neat, right?
Great question.
Here, could you hold that for me? Okay. Don't you dare drop it. Okay. Yes. So that is what a lyre is. Okay. So let's walk through this. And David and all the house of Israel were celebrating. Notice, so imagine I hadn't given you the background information about the book of Numbers, right? Think about how much of a surprise it would be whenever this plot twist happens and this guy dies, right? Because you're just reading through it and everybody's partying and having a great time, and then a dude's dead. They're like, what happened? So you're welcome. I kind of helped you out so it wasn't quite so shocking. So David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. You can imagine this. David is excited. I mean, this is a guy who was just a shepherd writing songs in the fields. And now God has elevated him to where he is the king of the entire nation. And he has gone through so many different things. And finally, for the first time in his life, things are going good. And he's relieved and he's happy. And he has the opportunity to bring the presence of God right next door to his own palace. And finally, he sees the Ark of God there. They've loaded it on a cart. They are dancing and they're hollering. David has got his lyre and he is like singing David's #1 hits. And everybody's going crazy. They're having an awesome time. Everybody's got their cymbals, their lyres, everything. It is a party. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah, this is one of the sons of Abinadab, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled.
Oh, so it was an accident.
It was an accident, right? This wasn't like this guy just being like, wow, this is amazing. Ooh, shiny. That's not what was happening. Literally, they're walking, and the roads back then, they're not like perfectly paved or anything, right? They're rocky, they're bumpy. The oxen are dragging this cart, and one of the oxen stumbles, and they're worried that maybe the Ark of the Covenant's about to tumble out, and Uzzah innocently reaches out to stop it, right? He's like, whoa! Mistake. It's really not Uzzah's fault. I mean, he probably was just reacting off instinct, right? It's probably not like he was discounting the holiness of God. He probably was just like, oh no, like he was actually probably esteeming God. And he was like, oh, I don't want to let the Ark of God fall over. The issue is that they shouldn't have been in the situation to begin with, right? It shouldn't have been oxen driving the cart. It should have been Levites carrying it on their shoulders. What would have happened if one of the Levites stumbled? I don't know. That's not the situation we're in. They shouldn't have been in this place to begin with. Uzzah should not be the person getting near this ark. And if you've read the law, you would know this. And so there they are. They're having a great party. And just think about how this is one of those things. There's 30,000 people in this whole thing, this whole entourage. It is a huge thing. You can imagine they are just having the time of their lives. And it probably takes a second for everybody to realize what's just happened. Right? They're just walking down the road. An ox this is something that happens in just a few seconds. Right? An ox stumbles. They're like, oh crud! Uzzah goes to stop it. Uzzah's dead. All of a sudden, the music's playing. Y'all ever seen, has anybody here seen the Harry Potter movies? Okay. Goblet of Fire. Whenever Harry returns with Cedric's body.
Oh, yeah.
You know that moment?
Yeah.
Where Harry shows up, and there's music playing, and everybody's partying, and they're like, oh, they're back! And everybody's just having a great time, and they're like, wow, Harry's got the cup! And then they notice that Harry is lingering over the body of a dead boy. And all of a sudden, everybody starts panicking and freaking out. That's kind of how this scene is right here. Uzzah put out his hand to the Ark of God, and he took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. He's just trying to stop the Ark from falling over. And the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the Ark of God. My oh my, God is just so mean, isn't he? Obviously that's sarcasm. What do y'all think? Here, I'll put that up.
I mean, I think it's kind of like hard to say because on one hand you did very specifically lay out the rules, but on the other hand, where were these rules when they were doing this? You know what I mean? How would they have gotten their hands on the rules to begin with? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I could argue, it's somewhere out there, right? He gave them the law. It's somewhere in Israel because we have it nowadays. So if we have it, 4,000 years after it was written, they probably had it 1,000 years after it was written. Actually, it's only been 400 years after it was written. Maybe 200, depending on when the Exodus happened.
If the ark had been in a different place, it would have been surrounded by people who would be studying the law, like the Levites.
Yes.
Whereas it's not just some random Israelites.
Yeah. If there had been Levites here, they would have hopefully known how to handle it, right? They would have probably known how to handle the situation. And also, there probably would have been things covering the ark, right? They would have put layers to where it's like, oh, you can touch it now. But instead, it seems like this ark is just gleaming out in the sunlight, and the dude just grabs hold of it, and God is angry. Now, I think the issue is that whenever people look at this, they make it like a personal, almost like a personal vendetta against Uzzah. And I don't think that's how we're supposed to understand God's anger here. I think his anger is not just like, "Ooh, man, that Uzzah." I think his anger is directed at Uzzah because Uzzah is the one who erred, but his anger is at the violation of his law, right? That's the issue. God is holy. He is set apart, and he gave them a law, and Uzzah is the one who broke it. Maybe Uzzah did it out of ignorance. We don't know. Maybe Uzzah knew better. I don't know. I think he was probably just acting out of instinct. But the issue is not like, "Oh, God is just so mad at Uzzah." Uzzah has broken the law. That is the issue. And he has touched something that is too holy to be touched. Right? And the Ark of the Covenant is just a golden box. But what it represents is the presence of God. And you have to remember, even Moses could not behold the presence of God with his eyes. Right? God had to put Moses behind a cleft of the rock, and he passed by at a distance, and even then Moses came down the mountain with his face glowing. So God is so glorious and so powerful in his presence that there has to be punishment for this. Yes?
Okay. I keep thinking it over and over again and not saying it, but because it doesn't matter necessarily, it doesn't change the way that I see God or who God is. But every time somebody dies like this in the Bible, I always get stuck wondering okay, but they died, but what happened after they died? What happened to them?
You mean afterlife?
Yes. I always it's I have to know, but I don't, because it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, no, I get that. So what we can say here is that we don't know much about Uzzah. So we don't know whether or not he was a faithful person or not. But we have to realize that actions are not the thing that save you, right? Faith is the thing that saves you, and that has been true ever since the very beginning, right? Abraham believed in God. It was counted him as righteousness. We all mess up, and I'm assuming, I'm just going to bet that Uzzah was probably a faithful person, that he had his faith in God, because, if you're picking somebody to transport the Ark of the Covenant, I hope that there's somebody who has placed their trust in Yahweh and trusts that Yahweh is going to redeem the world one day. I'm just going to assume that. I don't know, though. We don't know enough about Uzzah there. But, so we really just can't say. And that's something we have to recognize with pretty much anybody. That's a thing that we're constantly tempted by. We want to know, ooh, did this person go to heaven or hell? I don't know if it's really our business to know. I guess we'll just go to heaven one day and find out, right? It's oh, Uzzah, good to see you. Bro, why did you touch that thing? Please explain to me. Yeah, but I don't think we can totally know. Wish we could.
Do you think it was originally covered because they somehow got it into the cart and nobody died?
I've wondered that too. Yeah, I have wondered that because it specifically says a new cart, right? So we know that somehow the Philistines transported it, and we know, so I don't know that. I have wondered that, but I'm just going to assume that they did something correct there. Just because the Bible doesn't linger on it, unless there was already a long list of just dead people, passing it on. I'm assuming that something they did was correct, and that getting it onto a new cart and everything. It was specifically Uzzah touching it, and so maybe they'd been carrying it by the poles until then, but it was touching the ark itself or something. I'm not sure. And we have to recognize, some people will, they will genuinely look at this and they will use this as an accusation of God being, evil or something, which I personally think is a very arrogant position to take if you, as a finite little human, think that you know more about morality than the God who created the heavens and the earth. But I will point out, it's, sometimes I like to use the illustration of, why can't people touch this? Think about looking at the sun, right? You can't look at the sun directly without your eyes just being destroyed, right? It's you will go blind if you look at it long enough.
Yes.
What's more powerful, God or the sun?
God.
God. Who created the sun?
God.
God, right? And so I'd like to just use that as a comparison. Looking at the sun, it isn't an inherent, your eyes aren't inherently sinful if they go blind, right? No, it's just the fact that they literally cannot handle it. Right? We literally cannot handle the presence of God. If we can't handle something that he created, you think we can handle him? The Ark of God represents his presence, and his presence came to dwell there. And so I just want to use that illustration to show you yeah, this is actually a big deal. So, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the Ark of God. Boom. Party over.
Yeah.
They're just having a great time, and then one of the guys who tried to stop the ark from falling is dead. And they all know what happened. He touched the ark. And David was angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. This is where I was saying that David had good intentions, but he was doing things the wrong way. We don't know if David just didn't know the law, or if he had knowingly done things differently because he thought, oh, my heart's in the right place, God will make an exception. But David's actually angry here. And he's like, what the heck, God? I was doing a good thing. I was bringing your ark to my palace. We were going to have, this was for you. I was doing it for you. Why are you not receiving it? And God's like, because that's not what I asked for. To obey is better than to sacrifice, right? To listen to what I say is more important than to just do empty religious service, right? Yes, you were doing something that seemed really religious and spiritual, but you weren't doing it how I asked you to do it. And that's the lesson David has to learn. It's the same lesson that Saul had to learn, but Saul didn't ever learn the lesson. David is going to learn the lesson. So David's angry because the Lord had broken out against Uzzah. He's like, what the heck? I was doing this for you. I'm mad. Now my friend is dead. What the heck is going on here? And that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. It just means like the place where God broke out against Uzzah, basically. And David was afraid of the Lord that day. And he said, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? Is it good to be afraid of the Lord?
No.
No?
Well, I mean, sometimes yes.
What's the beginning of wisdom, Benjamin?
I think
Well,
it's
yeah,
like
but
a
I mean-
healthy fear is good.
Healthy fear.
Yes.
Like, that's not what I meant. Not in a bad way. I'm talking about like in a good way, but like not in like a negative sense. Like we shouldn't be afraid of God because He loves us. You know what I mean?
You should be afraid of God. He's
Well,
terrifying. He's
Yeah.
awesome. When he rolls up his sleeves, he ain't just putting on the Ritz. Our God is an awesome God.
I get that.
Yes, we should be afraid. This is a good thing. David was afraid because now he truly understood the holiness of God. Right? Before, he was excited about bringing the Ark of God here, but now he realizes how truly amazing God is. And he's afraid, and he realizes, wow, we can't even touch this box. And this isn't even him. This is simply the thing that represents his presence with us. How much more glorious is he? And he has seen his friend die. You don't think that's going to make you afraid? Absolutely. Because you realize that could have been you. David was dancing right next to him. He realizes, wow, what if I'd done the same thing? What if any of these guys had done the same thing? He's afraid, and you should be.
Yeah.
But you should be so afraid that it draws you closer to him. Right? It's kind of like being on a playground and there's this really big dude on the playground. You want that guy to be your best friend. Right? Because if anybody messes with you, they got to deal with him. Right? But you don't want to mess with him. You want to be on his good side. Right? Because he's the big dude who can beat you up. Right? You should be so afraid that it draws you near. Right? You recognize that God has power over heavens and the earth, but you also recognize he's a loving God. And you say, oh, maybe I want to be best friends with this guy. Because if he is for me, who can be against me? So David's afraid, and he says, how can the ark of the Lord come to me? So David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David. He says, guys, we need to put a halt on this procession. I want the ark of the God with us, but we need to figure out how to do this in a way that respects the holiness of God and honors God. And I don't know how to do that quite yet. So he's like, just pause. I'm going to go do some research, and we'll reconvene later on. So David was not willing to take the ark of the Lord into the city of David. Hey, look, it's called the city of David. Ir David. But David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. And I imagine they were like so nervous as they're like, okay, now let's bring it there. Nobody take it off the cart. Just leave it. Like, hey, Obed-Edom, is this okay? And he's like, yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fine. Who's that over there? Oh, that's Uzzah. He died. What did he do? He touched the ark. Okay. Yeah, sure, you can leave it here. So he takes it to Obed-Edom the Gittite, and the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his household. So here we have this one guy willing to take this ark into his house, and apparently things go really well for him in his house for 3 months. Kind of cool, huh? All right, we move on. Verses 12 through 15. Sean, take it away.
And it was told King David, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him, because of the Ark of God." So David went and brought up the Ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the Ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the Ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn.
Perfect. Thank you. So we don't get all the details in 2 Samuel, but what I did do is I included some verses from 1 Chronicles here. Because if you're not aware of this, 1st, 2nd Samuel are also kind of retold in 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Right? 1st and 2nd Chronicles are really, honestly, 1st and 2nd Chronicles kind of recap a lot of the Old Testament. But they specifically focus on the story of David as well. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 15, we read the same story, but there's a little bit different details that are shared. It's kind of like the Gospels, if you're comparing like Matthew and Mark. That's kind of how 1st and 2nd Samuel are to like 1st and 2nd Chronicles. There's just different details. And Chronicles is specifically more focused on the worship of God, and it's a lot more technical in regards to what it shares in regards to how God is worshipped, and it'll focus a lot more on the priests and stuff. And in 1 Chronicles chapter 15, we actually get to see what steps David took the second time whenever they went back to bring the Ark of God from Obed-Edom's house. And so I wanted to highlight this just so you can know why this time was okay and the last time was not. So this is what we read in 1 Chronicles 15. Then David said that no one but the Levites may carry the Ark of God. Good. For the Lord had chosen them to carry the Ark of the Lord and to minister to him forever. And the Levites carried the Ark of God on their shoulders with poles. Good. As Moses had commanded according to the word of the Lord. Good. So David and the elders of Israel and the commanders of thousands went to bring up the Ark of the Covenant to the Lord from the house of Obed-Edom with rejoicing. Okay. So you can see in 1 Chronicles 15, we see that David learned his lesson. Right? During those 3 months, I guess that he went and did some research, and he was like, hey, does anybody know if God ever gave like any instructions in regards to like how we're supposed to move this golden box? And some of the Kohathites were like, oh, did we not tell you about that? Yeah, that's our job. And he's like, would you like to share more? So the second time through, he does it the correct way. Right? And so it's no longer just some random people transporting it on a cart. This time, it is Levitical priests who are carrying it on their shoulders as prescribed by the law of Moses. So they're doing it the right way, which is a very good sign. And so we see that David learns to obey is better than sacrifice, right? He hears God and he obeys. Fun fact, I actually learned this whenever I was designing those shirts that we're going to be making. In Hebrew, whenever it says to obey is better than sacrifice, the word for obey is actually shema, which is to hear. And it kind of frustrates me that we translate it as obey. It's like whenever you hear Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind. It's to hear. So to hear is better than to sacrifice. Right? Because the idea is that if you hear what God says, you should obey. And so I just think that's kind of neat. So, back to 2 Samuel. And it was told King David, Yahweh has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the Ark of God. What do you think David's thinking when he hears this? Step in David's mind. People walk up to you, dude, Obed-Edom, that dude you put the Ark of God with, his household's being blessed. What's he thinking?
I want that.
I want that too. All right, let's give this a second shot. He's like, okay, well, if everything's going good for Obed-Edom, then maybe I do want this thing outside my palace too, because he wants his kingdom to flourish and be blessed, right? And so he's like, okay, well then we need to get this thing here. So David went and brought up the Ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing, right? So I like that the emphasis there, house of Obed-Edom, city of David. Right? So David recognizes, okay, if he is being blessed for having this Ark of Covenant in his house, then my city will be blessed by having the Ark of God there. And this, what you need to see here, this is something that's also prophesied in the Torah, right? It says that God will choose a place for his name to dwell. This is the moment when that happens, right? God is choosing Jerusalem as the place where his name will dwell. And that is something that is true from this story going forward, right? Jerusalem is the holy city, right? And that's not just an Old Testament thing. It's not just a New Testament thing. It's talked about in Revelation, right? Jerusalem is God's headquarters. This is the place where Jesus himself will reign forever and ever. So this is where that happens, right? So there's a lot of groundbreaking stuff that's happening over chapters like 5, 6, 7 of 2 Samuel. So David went, brought up the Ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. They're partying again. 3 months have passed, and now they know that they're doing things the right way, and so everybody's able to rejoice without being afraid of another person dying. And when those who bore the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's it. 6 steps. He sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. What's he doing?
Sacrificing to God.
Why?
Because no one's died yet.
Because no one's died yet, yeah. It's worship, right? That's part of their worship, right? Whenever we think of sacrifice, we're like, ooh, gross. That's what the law commands, right? They are sacrificing because that is part of their worship. And they have made 6 steps closer to Jerusalem than they have in months. And he says, everybody stop. We got to sacrifice an animal. So they stop, they sacrifice an animal, and we see that the focus is not just on getting the ark to Jerusalem. The focus is on worshiping God along the way. And David danced before the Lord with all his might. Hence why I have this picture right here. He's dancing before the Lord with all his might. Imagine the picture, right? Think about how weird this is. Here you have the king of all Israel dancing as he enters into the city. And David was wearing a linen ephod. Do y'all know what an ephod is?
A special thing you're supposed to wear when you're next to the...
So it's specifically a priestly garment. And there's a debate about this. It could have been something like a loincloth. But it could have been something that covered a little bit more. Just for the humor's sake, I made it more of like a loincloth or type of skirt thing here. It also could have been more something like a... almost like a poncho. Right? Like just something that something that just draped over your shoulders. Right? And so either way, he's not dressed in a whole lot, is he? He is dressed in minimal attire. And he's kind of dressed like a priest, but with less covering. He is dancing in a... Just imagine this, right? This is probably not a picture that y'all want in your head, but the leader of our country, right? Joe Biden, right? Imagine... No, I know it's weird. But imagine, here you have Joe Biden guiding some sort of... I don't even know what the equivalent of this would be. Like, imagine that like the presence of God dwelt on like a cross or something, right? Joe Biden dancing in a loincloth as a super special cross is being carried into the White House. And it's being televised. National news. Head now?
Yeah,
Right.
there was some confusion on what time I was
Right.
supposed to be picked up.
Yeah, no problem. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Take care.
But think about how weird of a scene this is. This is not some random guy. David is no longer just a little shepherd boy. He is the king of the entire nation. And he is not just sitting in the back being like, yay, the Ark of God is here. No, he is dancing all out, just like flailing around. He's probably got his harp in his hands. He's probably clapping some cymbals. And he's wearing nothing but a linen ephod. Linen, kind of thin material, right? This dude, he's ready to sweat. Right? He is going all out. He is genuinely having an amazing time. But who is he dancing before?
The Lord.
The Lord. Is he doing this because he wants attention on himself?
No.
Is he doing this because he wants everybody to think he's super spiritual? No, he's doing it because the presence of God is coming to dwell in his city. And he could not be more excited. Think about if that's how we reacted by like getting saved. Right? The Spirit of God coming to dwell inside of us. Like, that would be crazy. But David gets it, right? He is freaking out. He's like, guys, this is amazing. The Ark of God's coming to dwell here. And he's literally just dancing, and he's singing, and he's not wearing a whole lot. And it's got to be quite the sight. Because this is a king who has no pride. He is totally humbled, and he is celebrating the fact that the King of Kings is coming to dwell with him. Right? Super exciting. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting, with the sound of the horn. Now this is a party on steroids, right? Everybody's going crazy. 30,000 people all going through there. Their king is at the front of all of them, doing all sorts of dancing. The psalmist of Israel in his habitat, right? We move on. Take it away, Sean.
As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place, inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and distributed among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each one. Then all the people departed, each to his house.
All right, the story progresses. What do y'all think here?
He's still feeling super happy.
David is having the time of his life. Like, I've got to think that this is probably like the best moment of David's life. Like, he is just having a absolutely fantastic time. Unfortunately for him, it's going to be one of those times. We've all had moments like this where you're having like the best day of your life, and then like just you go to celebrate with somebody, and then they just like ruin the moment for you. You know what I mean? Like, you ever been there? I don't even know like what moment I'm thinking of in my own head, but I know that emotion. You know, where you're like, man, this is amazing, and you like go to tell somebody, and then they just like ruin it for you instantly, and you're like, what the heck? That's what's coming here, right? So David is going to go from like best moment ever to like somebody just going to ruin it for him. And we're introduced to that person right here. Who is it?
The woman.
His first.
Michal, right? His wife. All right, let's talk about Michal. Who is she?
Wait, what? His
Daughter of
wife?
Saul.
Michal, the daughter of Saul. Yes.
Oh.
From earlier, we talked about her.
Yes. Who is Michal?
That's David's wife?
One of his wives. One of his wives.
Daughter.
So, daughter of Saul. What's their story?
Was that the one that they took from the other guy?
Yes. Yeah, so there's the whole story about Michal, right? This is the one where back whenever David was a warrior in Saul's army, first Saul offered him one daughter, and David's like, who am I to marry one of the daughters of the king? And he's very humble. But then there's another daughter of the king who kind of catches David's eye, and that's Michal. And Saul's like, do you want to marry Michal? And David's like, yeah, I'd like to do that. And Saul, at this point, Saul has become very jealous of David. And he's like, okay, well, if you want to do that, this is the weird story. He's like, if you want to marry Michal, I'm going to need you to bring me 100 Philistine foreskins. Weird request. And he's trying to get David killed, right? And you have to realize that, I know, foreskin, it's weird to us. That was how they, like, counted their kills in battle, right? Kind of a weird way of doing it, but that's how they do it. And so he's like, yeah, go kill 100 Philistines for me. Which, from Saul's perspective, is a sure way to get David killed, right? One David versus 100 Philistines. David comes back with 200 foreskins. And he's like, sorry, I really want to marry your daughter. And so he went overboard and actually killed twice as many Philistines, because that's just who David is. And so he got to marry Michal, which is really cool. But then, whenever Saul officially turns against David, Michal's the one who helps him get on the run. Remember, like, Michal vouches for him and even, like, pulls the whole Ferris Bueller thing, where she stuffs his bed with, like, a fake, like, I think it's like an idol, so that whenever they come to check on David, she's like, oh, he's sick. Sorry, he's just laying in bed. And then, like, David escapes out the window, and he goes on the run and goes and lives in the desert. And then they come in there, and they're like, that's not David, that's a statue. And so Michal's the one who helps him get away. But then, David's on the run for like 10 years. And during that time, Michal is given to another man. And then, we saw this a few chapters ago, once Saul is dead and everything, and David is now on the throne in Judah, and Abner, the commander, defects to David's side, David says, you want to prove you're loyal to me? Get me Michal back. And we read this heartbreaking story where Abner goes and gets Michal and brings her to David, and it says that her husband followed along the way weeping. Because he's been married to this girl for who knows how long, maybe almost a decade. And this poor guy has just been caught in the middle of this whole political scheming, to where he's just kind of this innocent dude who's just left weeping as his wife is ripped from him. And it's just really sad. But now Michal is back with David. And Michal is the daughter of Saul. And you have to recognize that she knows what it's like to be a princess. Right? And she knows what it's like to be royalty. And her dad would never do anything like this. Right? Her dad always recognized that he was above the people. Right? Saul always recognized that your reputation matters. And how you hold yourself in front of people says something about you. And if you're a king, you should act regal and royal. And you should not, act like you're as lowly as just the common people. And so, as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. She says, "Where's the guy I used to know? Who is this? Right? You're the king of Israel? My dad would have never done what you're doing." Whereas obviously from David's perspective, it's like, oh, yeah, your dad wasn't a very good guy. So Michal's looking at this, and she sees her husband. And to be fair, I do want to be fair to Michal here. Imagine that you're the wife of somebody, and you see your husband dancing through the streets half naked.
Oh.
You're probably going to be like, honey, we need to have a talk. You'd probably, I understand where she's coming from. That doesn't make her correct, right? So she's looking at David. She despises him in her heart. That's problematic, because who is he dancing before?
The Lord.
The Lord. And so as she's looking down on him, what is she looking down upon? God. And she's looking down upon worship. And that is probably not the best look, especially since one of the last times we heard about Michal in 1 Samuel, it was her having a pagan idol in her house. Right? Probably not the best look on Michal. So she looks, she sees David, and everybody else is celebrating. Right? Nobody else is looking on David being like, a king shouldn't be this way. But she is looking outside her window, and you can just feel the pride, just emanating off of her. Right? She looks, and she's looking down on him. She's not celebrating the fact that the presence of God is literally right there. She's not celebrating the fact that her husband has never been this joyful in his entire life. She's just looking at him, and she despises him because she disagrees with how he's doing things. But we'll come back to that in a second. And they brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. I'm assuming this isn't the tabernacle, which is just kind of an interesting note. I don't really know what happens to the tabernacle. I don't know if they took the tabernacle from Shiloh and that's the tent that David pitched here, or if the tabernacle is still just chilling out in Shiloh. I don't fully know. But David pitched a tent here, and I'm assuming it's not the tabernacle, and they bring the Ark of the Covenant and they set it there, and it's going to sit there for a while. But David's not going to want it to sit there in a while, and we'll talk about that next week, whenever David starts revealing his plans for the Ark of God. But for right now, it's going to sit right there in the tent. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. Once again, why are they doing this? Worship. It's what the law commands. Right? And so once again, for us, we would be terrified by this. Imagine you're having this amazing party, and then all of a sudden the king tells a bunch of people to grab animals and start killing them. We'd be like, whoa, what the heck? For them, this is something they're celebrating. They probably haven't, think about it. If they haven't had the Ark of the Covenant, they probably haven't been doing their sacrifices, right? This is almost a moment of revival, right? This is this is the king instituting religious reform and revival, and they have the Ark of God here that it's put in the tent. They are sacrificing to God, and he is sending a very clear message. This is God's capital too, right? Political capital, religious capital are the same thing, right? My kingdom is a kingdom under God. I might be the king that you see, but he is the kingdom. He's the king that we serve, right? That is what David's message is here. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts and distributed among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel. Keep in mind, this is 30,000 people. Both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each one. So what does David do? He feeds them. Now tell me, whenever Samuel warned the people about what kings would do, what was the word he always used? Take. What does David do here? He gives. This is a really good sign, right? This is a super strong start to David's reign, right? David's not always going to be this great. We'll see that in a few chapters as well. But right here, this is a good moment. He is celebrating, he is worshiping God, and he's giving things to the people. And presumably, this is all off his own funds, right? He is feeding the people, he's giving them meat, he's giving them bread, he's giving them raisin cakes. He's like, guys, this is a party. Like, everybody, like, just think about being a common person watching this whole thing. You're learning a lot about your king in these moments, right? You are learning about the things that he values. You're learning about how he cares for you. And just think about going home. And, like, if you're, like, one of the men here and you're going home to tell your wife about this. So, honey, how was your day today? Honestly, I don't even know how to explain it. I mean, like, the king, first off, he was wearing very little, but we weren't even focusing on that. He was so overjoyed by his love for the Lord, and he gave us food, and we worshiped God, and it was amazing. And like it's just like a totally different thing. You would never expect a king to be doing this, but it's really cool to where David is not a priest, right? He's not a Levite, but in many ways, he's doing something more than the Levites have been doing for the last few generations as well. Really, the last time we've seen the Levites doing anything worthwhile, it was something horrible, and it was in the book of Judges when they were chopping people into pieces and starting civil wars. David is taking the Levites and having them carry the Ark of the Covenant, right? Like, David is literally just reforming things. Like, it's really amazing what David is accomplishing here. And so he blesses everybody in the name of Yahweh, Shabbayot, right? The God of heaven's armies. Then all the people departed, each to his house, right? So the party comes to an end and everybody goes home. And now we've got to wonder, oh, is the story over? Not quite yet. Because David has to go home too, and he's going home to an unhappy wife. Uh-oh. All right. This is the end of the chapter. And this is my favorite part of the whole thing. All right, Sean, go for it.
And David returned to bless his household. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants' female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." And David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord, who chose me above your father and above all his house, to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord, and I will celebrate before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible in this, and I will be abased in your eyes. But by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor." And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death.
Wow.
The last line sounds really random. It's not random. But whenever you're just reading it, it's like, oof, yikes. So this word contemptible right here, in some translations, it's undignified. Right? And I shall be more undignified than this. This is an amazing moment. Kind of a intense moment, right? And I'm not going to say that everything David says here is probably said in the most God-honoring of hearts. I don't know. I can't totally look at his heart and say that. I think there was probably some impulsive words chosen here, but everything he says is true. We can say that. But all because it's true doesn't mean it needs to be said. I think he's lashing out a little bit because he's like, "Honey, I was having a great day until you had to ruin it." But let's walk through this because, or actually, before we do that, what do y'all think?
His wife?
It's his wife?
Yeah. Well, it was like how he's, from the very beginning, the daughter of Saul, instead of like his wife.
Yeah. Yeah, notice that it never says, "and Michal, the wife of David." It's always Michal, the daughter of Saul. What else do y'all notice?
I mean, Michal looked on David as he was dancing to the Lord and said that was bad. Yeah. And then God turned it on her, and then he could have a kid. So.
Yeah. How dare you oppose the Lord's anointed, right? Apparently she wasn't of the same mindset of David. Anything else? What are your first thoughts?
Makes you think about humility.
Humility? Yeah.
Yeah, being more humble.
Yeah.
Instead of being prideful.
Yep.
As we are naturally are.
It makes me think about like pastors in the street who are like, "Praise the Lord Almighty, praise God." Then there are people who are looking at you like, "What the heck are you doing, bro?"
Yeah. And that's that is honestly the difficult part about this, because you can understand where Michal is coming from, right? Like if I were Michal, if I were in her sandals, I'm not sure I wouldn't be reacting the same way. But the text makes it clear whose side we're supposed to take, right? It's David. Like, David is the one in the right here. I think he probably could have handled this discussion a little bit better. But either way, I think her heart was so hardened that even if he had handled it better, it's not like it would have changed anything. But yeah, so it is kind of weird because we are so quick to judge things whenever we have to realize that our perception is often skewed. Like, the people who lived during Jesus' ministry, if you would ask any of them, they would never, like, they might have said he was a good person, but none of them would have said he was sinless. Right? I mean, honestly, most of the time, Jesus is being accused of being a sinner and hanging out with sinners. And it's only later on that we realize, oh, he was sinless. You know, so sometimes our perception is off. And so maybe it does slow us down when it comes to judgment, right? Be quick to hear, slow to speak, right? So David returns to bless his household, right? David is having a great time, best day of his life. He got the ark to the tent. Nobody died. They've been partying. He's been dancing. He's probably caked in sweat. He has just been having the time of his life. He comes home. He's like, honey, I'm home. And he comes in to bless his household. And he's probably walking up to his children. He's just like, oh, God bless you. God bless you. This is a great day. God bless you. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David. And already you're like, oh no. This is bad. This is not good. And you just know David, like, as soon as he saw her, you know that he knew what was coming, right? Like, this is one of those things where he's just having a great time, and he's like, oh. He's like, oh, no. Probably rolls his eyes. He's like, oh, what's she got to say now? So Michal, the daughter of Saul, comes out to meet David and says, and you can just read the sarcasm in her voice, how the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. This does not sound like a healthy relationship. This is horrible. Just the accusation in her voice.
He's trying to compare him to a stripper, basically.
Basically, yeah.
Or
Yeah. A prostitute or something.
Yeah.
What do y'all notice about her comment here?
Very negative.
Very negative.
Toward David.
Toward David.
It has more to do with like his action more than like what was really happening.
Yeah.
Does he look like rather than who he really is?
Yeah.
She cares about that outward appearance.
To go back to what we read in 1 Samuel 16, the Lord, man looks on the outward appearance. The Lord looks to the heart. I mean, man can't help it. That's what we do. We look at the outward appearance. We cannot know the heart. The issue is that very often we judge people purely based off the outward appearance without ever trying to understand the heart. Right? All you have to do is ask. But she sees here, she's looking at the outward appearance, and she's like, nope, this is not it. This is bad news bears. But that's the issue. We've been reading. We know where David's heart was. David knows where his heart was. She is accusing him of something that we know is a false charge. But she's simply looking at the outward appearance. But that's probably pretty consistent. Because what did her father care about? Outward appearance. That's all Saul cared about. Right? Even whenever Saul was being rebuked by Samuel, he's like, oh, I've sinned against the Lord. Now go with me so that you can honor me before the people. And so even whenever he's trying to repent and apologize, he's like, yeah, but hey, can you just like walk out there with me so that everybody thinks that we're on good terms? Like, Saul was all about outward appearance. So you can see where Michal's coming from. This is what she was raised by, right? David was out there living as a fugitive in the wilderness, and she's being raised as a princess. She married another guy, right? Like, she was raised by Saul. That is her perspective on life. She looks on the outward appearance. And you even see this, how the king of Israel honored himself today. She's mocking him, but what does that tell you about her opinion on what a king should do? What should he be doing? How the king of Israel honored himself, right? It's all about how you present yourself. She's mocking him because, in her opinion, he did not honor himself, right? She's like, you should have been making more efforts to look a little bit more dignified before everybody. You are royalty. You are not a commoner. You do not belong down there dancing with the common people. You need to honor yourself. You're a king. Come on, David. Get your act together. Ironically, do you remember why it was that the people loved David to begin with whenever he was first rising through the ranks of Saul's army?
He was the one at the gates.
He was the one at the gates.
He defeated
Fighting for them.
Yeah, he was the one who went in and out in the city, right? He was the people's people. Right? Like he was the man of the people. That's why they loved him, because he didn't view himself as above them. Right? He was a shepherd who came from nowhere, middle of nowhere Bethlehem, and he never viewed himself as above them. He always interacted with them. He always just intermingled with them. And that hasn't changed now. He doesn't view himself as higher than them all because he's king. But from her perspective, she's little Princess Michal. She's like, oh, how the king of Israel honored himself. And his whole point in his reaction, he's like, I wasn't out there to honor myself. Honestly, I could care less about how I look. I was just trying to honor God, because this is the kingdom of God, unless you forgot, honey. It's not the kingdom of David. It's not about me. It's about him. That is his whole point. Her whole point is, no, it's about your own reputation. You need to make sure that you look good in front of people. You're a king, act like a king. How the king of Israel honored himself today. And then this is the part where I begin to empathize with her a little bit, right? Uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. From a wife's perspective, I can understand where she's coming from, but she is exaggerating a little bit. Right? I don't think David was doing anything lewd here, and I highly doubt that David was showing anything inappropriate. She's exaggerating. But what is she trying to get across?
Well, if the king is supposed to be outwardly attractive and like honoring himself, only caring about the outward appearance, well then women would want to be with David. So I guess she might be like, I don't want you to take on any more wives.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. We know that David does have a problem with women. And he's going to have more problems with women. And we know that women do want to be with David, right? This is something that Saul was aware of whenever David was rising through the ranks, right? Like women, like literally they would come back from war, and the women would be singing, Saul has killed his thousands, David his tens of thousands. Like David was the guy on like Teen Bop magazine of Israel back in that time period, right? Like he was the one that all the girls wanted to be with. And so it seems like maybe you have some insecurity on Michal's part coming in here as well, but it's not delivered in the best way, is it? No, she's mocking him. And maybe it's rooted in insecurity, but really it just seems like she's just looking down upon him, right? And it's below him to be doing this, right? Because notice, she doesn't just say you are uncovering yourself before the women. It's your servants, female servants, right? The emphasis is on those people are below you, and the women you were dancing before, they're below the people who are below you. They're the lowest of the low. She's highlighting the difference between royalty and lay people. And she's like, oh, those aren't even the servants. They're the servants' servants. And that's who you were dancing in front of. That's how the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncover themselves. You were basically flashing them. Now, was David flashing them? No. He was wearing priestly garments. Right? There was nothing inappropriate about what he was wearing. But you know what it wasn't? Flashy purple robes that kings would typically wear. Right? He wasn't as covered up. He wasn't flexing his wealth on people. The only wealth he was flexing was buying money or buying food to give out to them. Right? So he was using his money to serve the people, not to show off himself. Right? So that's the issue. He wasn't flashing anybody. He was wearing appropriate attire. But from her perspective, unless you're covered head to toe in royal regalia, you're not. Like, you're basically flashing somebody. Right? You're wearing your undergarments. Oh, unacceptable. And, like, think about this from a modern perspective. I'm a teacher of high school students now. Now, imagine you've got, like, this popular couple at school. And then one day, the guy, like, I can just imagine this even in our school right now. Like, I'm at a private school, right? They go to chapel one day. You've got the popular couple, right? They're the it couple, right? Everybody's like, ooh, that's the most popular couple in the school. They go to chapel one day, and maybe one day, the guy just gets totally into worship, and he is standing next to the girl, and he is, like, just singing at the top of his lungs. He's acting a little bit crazier. I can imagine the girl, like, kind of being like, you know, like, kind of embarrassed, right? 'Cause she's like, hey, we've got a reputation to uphold. We're the cool couple here. He doesn't care, though. That's kind of the situation, right? To put it in like a modern perspective and like a lot less extreme scenario, right? That's kind of how she feels right now. She's like, we're above this, David. What are you doing? And he's like, it's called worshiping, sweetheart. Try it sometime. It's called focusing on somebody other than yourself, namely the one who created us. Would you like to do that? And then notice how David responds. I love it. You can tell that he's like, she just like lit a fuse. Like he was already at like a heightened emotional state, you know, like he was already so joyful. So like whenever she like says this to him, he's already like all amped up. You know that like he was probably not saying this in a calm voice. And David said to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord. And I will celebrate before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible, undignified than this. And I will be abased in your eyes. But by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor." What do y'all think of David's response?
He's saying like someone who's like as wealthy and above than like these lesser people, I suppose. Like, I don't care about your opinion, but these people are gonna honor me.
Yeah. He's like, honestly, honey, I could care less about what you have to say because you don't know my heart. I was dancing before God. I was not dancing to impress these women. And you know what? Those women, they're going to honor me, but not because I was seeking their honor. And it's not because I was trying to flirt with them or show myself to them. It's because they saw what it looks like to worship God. And they're going to respect that. So, really good response. Yeah.
Application point. That goes back to the fact that we shouldn't care what other people think about us. I mean, we should be obedient to God regardless of what people think. Which is really hard, but I mean,
yeah.
God deserves it.
Or maybe to frame it like we should care more about what God thinks than what people thinks. Right? That's usually the issue. It doesn't mean like David's not going to go out of his way to make people think badly of him, right? He just doesn't really care either way. That's the difference, right? It's not like you should like, hey guys, make sure you go out of your way to look really stupid in front of people. No, that's not what it's saying. Just stop caring, right? Care about what God thinks. And it doesn't matter if you have the approval of man if God's against you, right? You need God's approval, not man's. Yes?
I know that's something I face personally too, is like, I'm afraid people are going to, especially where I go to school, it's very liberal and very, not a lot of faithful people there. And everyone's just going to be like, ooh, who's that weird Christian guy? Ooh.
Yeah. And the thing is, we all face this, right? This is not something like, all because I'm the one saying this doesn't mean that I've perfected this. I'm just saying what David's doing. And we have to realize David is exceptional, right? That's why, that's the whole reason we're spending so many weeks studying his life. Is because he is a man after God's own heart, and I hope that every single person in this room would like to be a man or woman after God's own heart. And so we're like, okay, well, let's maybe look at somebody who actually did it. And we look at this, and we're like, that's what we're supposed to do. But that doesn't mean it's easy to do, right? And that's why we have to spend so much time being amazed by it. Like, if it was easy to do, we wouldn't be impressed, right? That it's difficult, and that's why we're impressed. Yes?
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Hopping off of Benjamin, because he was like application point, but also another one is like to almost act as if we're like blind when we're trying to figure out something. As Christians, I think the right thing to do is like if we see something happening that other Christians might be doing and we're like weirded out by it, or just like doesn't have to be a Christian thing, but just we see something that's kind of odd, is to not judge it, but to ask more questions. To be like, hey, like this is kind of like what it looks like you guys are doing, but like, what are you doing? And we see David doing that too whenever like the guy brings Saul's head and he doesn't like immediately execute him, but he like asks
Please explain.
him questions. And then once he saw like his heart, he was like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay. But I feel like we should definitely, I don't know, some of us would be blessed by God if we were just like blind.
Yeah.
And we had to ask questions to figure out.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, what we need is discernment. Yeah. The issue is we don't like discernment because discernment implies gray area, right? Because that means that we have to actually seek the Lord's will, and we need to figure out what it looks like to trust Him. We like black and white things. We like putting things into boxes. That's not typically how God likes to work, though. There are certain things where God's like, yes, like, don't murder somebody, right? But there's other things where we need discernment. And think about how differently this conversation would have come. Like, Dawn, if David came home and Michal's like, hey, honey, I'm so excited that you were having a great time out there. I couldn't help but notice that your attire is questionable. And why are you wearing that? You know, like if she genuinely just asked, right? Instead of just like immediately jumping to accusations, if she just asked for clarity, and was like humble enough to seek, like, what is your heart behind this? It would have gone totally different. But instead, she immediately jumps to conclusions, and that's what we need to watch out for, right? We should seek discernment, and we should ask questions. We should say, hey, like, what's going on here? We don't want to just blindly accept everything, but we don't want to jump to conclusions about stuff as well, right? And so we need to live in that tension. But let's walk through his response right here, because I realize it's coming close to 9 o'clock, and we have a second study thing to do in a second, for those who want to stay for that. So, David said to Michal, it was before the Lord. Right? So he makes it clear right off the bat, I was dancing before God. Right? You're accusing me of dancing before the women. You're focusing on all the wrong things. I was focused on one thing. Him. That's it. I was dancing before God. Like literally everything. Like basically it's like everything you said is wrong. Like just everything. I was dancing before the Lord. That's all the explanation he needed to say. But then he keeps on going. Who chose me above your father and above all his house. This is one of those things where I'm like, yeah, what he's saying is true. Did it need to be said in this particular moment, and did it really mend the relationship? Probably not. But what's he getting across by saying this?
It wasn't about me trying to get attention for myself.
Yeah. He says, there's a reason God chose me. It's because he knew that I put him first. Your dad did not put him first, and that's why your dad was rejected as king. And that's why his kingdom was rejected. God chose me above your father and above his house because I was willing to put God first where your dad was not and his house was not. That's why I was dancing before God. So if you don't understand it, don't put that on me. That's on your dad and your household. Right? Because y'all were the ones who don't know how to put God first. That's why God chose me. Man after God's own heart. And I don't think he's trying to say this in a boastful manner. Right? I think it sounds that way because I don't know if he is delivering it in the best way. I don't think this is probably the proper time in a relationship to start delivering theological points. Right? You know, you have to use discernment, and this is probably not the moment to be like, hey, let me bring up the fact why I'm more important than your dad. That's not probably the best moment. But I don't think he's intending to say it pridefully. I think he's just explaining it to her, probably just not the best moment. It is before the Lord who chose me above your father and above his house to appoint me as prince over Israel. It sounds boastful, but notice where he's heading with it. As prince over Israel, the people of the Lord. He doesn't say my people, he says they're God's people. Right? God chose me over your dad and over his household to be the prince over his people. They're not my people, they're his people. And that's why he chose me, because I was the one who recognized that. Your dad viewed them as his people, and that's why he was so willing to take from them. I recognize that they're God's people, and therefore, as king, I'm going to do whatever it takes to point them to God. And therefore, if that means me going out and dancing before God and making a fool of myself in order to communicate a message, so be it. He's like, I don't care if I look like a king. The only thing I care about is pointing people towards God. And if I have to make myself look like a fool to do it, so be it. And I will celebrate before the Lord. He's like, you can't stop me. I don't care if you're embarrassed by it. I'm going to celebrate God, right? It's kind of like in the Jesus Revolution movie we just saw. There's this one part where this couple's talking to each other, and the guy says to the girl, he's like, hey, if you get between me and God, we're done. And I just love it. That's basically what David's saying. He's like, honey, if you're trying to get between me and God, this isn't going to work out. He says, if you're going to get mad at me every time I worship, then you're going to be mad a whole lot. Because I am going to celebrate before God. The presence of God dwells next door to us. That is a cause for celebration. And if you're going to be mad about it, you can leave. I've got plenty of other wives. No, I'm kidding. Probably not the time to bring that up either, because that is not exactly worshiping the Lord. He says, I will make myself yet more contemptible, undignified than this. Basically, translation, you ain't seen nothing yet. You think this is bad? Oh, wait till you see what I've got planned next. I'm not planning because what's he planning? Like, we know what's going to happen next. Chapter 7, he wants to build a temple for God. God's made him a palace, and he's like, but I'm going to build God a bigger palace. He's like, oh, if you don't like what I'm doing as royalty so far, you're going to hate what I got planned next. I'm making somebody else a palace bigger than ours. And it's for a golden box. So he's like, I'm going to be more contemptible than this. You haven't seen anything yet. I will be undignified, no matter what it takes for him to receive the glory, that's what I'm going to do. And I will be abased in your eyes. Why? Because he knows that she doesn't value it, right? He knows that she's not going to like suddenly change her mind and start valuing these things. He's like, yeah, so you haven't seen anything. Just get used to disappointment because I'm probably going to come home looking like this quite often because I'm not going to stop praising God no matter how much you tell me to. But by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I'll be held in honor. Not because he's seeking honor from them, but because as king, he is properly teaching them to value God. And if they value God and they see him honoring God, they will honor him. Right? So he says, yeah, you know what? I wasn't trying to impress them, but they're going to be impressed. And you're going to keep being unimpressed. Because the issue is not me. The issue is your devotion to God and their devotion to God. They're devoted to him. You're not. So get used to disappointment. Because I'm not stopping anytime soon. And this is when Queen started singing, "Don't Stop Me Now." And then David went out and started dancing again. What do y'all think about that? You see the room for application there?
Yeah.
Care what God thinks more than people.
Yeah.
Don't care what man may think.
Yeah. And also putting others first in the sense of do whatever it takes to point them to God, even if it means making yourself look dumb. Like, this is something I've recognized when it comes to helping minister to people. Sometimes you have to admit to it, like, I would love to sit up here as a Bible study leader and just act like I'm the perfect individual, but the best way to minister to people is by admitting that I'm not, and by telling them about all the different sins I'm aware of in myself. And yeah, that makes me look dumber, and it makes me look stupid, and it makes me look less perfect. But it helps everybody else who's listening understand more about God, right? And it helps give him the glory. Because now it's less about David up here, and it's more about the God who forgave David, right? And so that's the really cool thing that David's understanding here. He's like, I will do whatever it takes to help people glorify God. Even if I, the king of Israel, have to look like a lowly little person running through the streets half naked. He's like, I don't care. I'll do more than that. Like, he's like, this isn't, like, to me, these are just stepping stones in glorifying God. I genuinely don't care about my reputation as long as I'm seeking the approval of God. That's all I cares about. So there's a lot of application there. I know that it's late, and so we'll just move on to this last verse, and then we'll wrap it up. And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death.
Yikes.
What's up with that?
Punishment.
I think that maybe just says that she was never like appeasable.
Yeah. A few ways to look at this.
She was, in God's eyes, she was not worthy of David.
Yeah. So there's two sides of this, right? There's the divine side and the human side. One side, God closed her womb. The second side, I don't know how many intimate moments David and her had after this. But also, it's a good thing that Michal never had any children with David, because that would have also been weird, because then it would be the house of Saul and David blending together. But yeah, so this seems to be more specifically punishment from God, right? That her womb is closed because she opposed David and did not value the kingdom of God as David would. Which is interesting, because now you're like, well, wait a second. If Michal's not going to have a son for David, then who is going to be the next king of Israel? And that's going to be a good question that we're going to have to be wrestling through as we read through these chapters. Because David does need an heir. Speaking of which, next week we will be talking about David's eternal kingdom. And like I mentioned, this chapter is one that really excites me, but next week's chapter is the single most important chapter in 1st and 2nd Samuel. Like, that is one that you do not want to miss, and if you miss it, you need to go watch the video like after we posted it. Because next week is something where we have the Davidic covenant instituted, right? And the Davidic covenant is something that we are still seeing the effects of to this day, and we would not be gathering in this room if it were not for that covenant being made. And so, definitely, like, that's going to be a really super duper important one. I hope y'all are excited for that. Could I get somebody to close us out in prayer? Then we'll take maybe like a 5 to 10 minute break, and then for those of y'all who want to stick around so that we can study one of the Psalms of David, that correlates to this story, we can do that. And then if some of y'all need to leave, y'all can also do that as well. Could I get somebody to pray for us? Ben, could you do it for us?
Father, dear Lord, thank you, God, so much for gathering us together tonight to study your word. Help us to apply the truth that we are to be humble and serve you, God, and not care what the world around us is thinking, but that we would serve you, God, and point them to you, and to be a light in this dark world. Please keep us safe as we go home, and may you be praised, Lord, for the rest of this week. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.